I'm thrilled to be joined by a very special guest making his debut on The Beat tonight. John Podesta is one of the most experienced people in Democratic administrations. He ran a White House as Bill Clinton's chief of staff, advised President Obama, and of course chaired the Hillary Clinton campaign. In fact, that harsh 2016 campaign made household names of both nominees' chairs. This week, it's Trump's former chair on trial for several felonies, while Podesta remains a victim in the related investigation into the Russian hacking. That new association, though, only comes after many years where Podesta was widely known in politics for being at the center of every major battle.
I am honored to name him today as the next White House Chief of Staff.
Working here means a great deal to me.
To deal with the possible impeachment hearings in Congress, the White House has put together a new crisis team led by Deputy Chief of Staff John Podesta.
They want him to stay in office. They want him to keep doing his job.
I've also asked my counselor, John Podesta, to lead a comprehensive review of big data and privacy. My friend John Podesta ran my transition.
Back to the Clinton headquarters. We're understanding John Podesta has just walked in the room.
They're still counting votes, and every vote should count.
Today, Podesta is part of a Democratic vote counting operation for Trump's controversial Supreme Court pick, Brett Kavanaugh, insisting his records from the White House are a potential Pandora's box the Senate must scrutinize. The judge's confirmation hearing could come in September. Basically, within weeks of the midterms, Democrats say it's past time to go on offense. First, let me welcome you, John, and say, you know, you look at the old footage, you're one of those people that looked older when you were young. Now you look a little young that you're older. I don't know how you did it.
It's the fountain of youth, Ari, and it's good to be with you. And by the way, given that introduction, I have to say I'd rather be in this seat than Paul Manafort's seat right now.
Well, I think that's true for most people, and it's a testament to what everyone knows was an unusually harsh, foreign-attacked, wild 2016 campaign, and you and him are in very different situations. I want to get to so many things, including your views of the Mueller probe where you figure into it. But I want to begin with something you've been leading on and that Democrats say is so important to the future of the nation and that sometimes gets wiped away by other Trump drama. You say that we don't know enough about Brett Kavanaugh. You say they are being secretive about his records. Walk us through why that matters and what Democrats should do about it.
Well, look, Ari, Kavanaugh served in the White House as staff secretary. That was the first position I served in for President Clinton. Todd Stern, who succeeded me in that job, and I wrote an op-ed piece in the Washington Post this week, noting that the Republicans are really trying to cover up his record there. They don't want to go to the archives, look what advice he gave President Bush, calling him a traffic cop, a paper pusher, saying he didn't create his own documents, and that's nonsense. The role of staff secretary is not well known, but it's a very important policymaking job. He was promoted from senior associate White House counsel into that job. He carried the very top title, assistant to the president, in the White House. He was clearly a key policy advisor at a time that President Bush was making important decisions around restricting abortion rights, trying to push for a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage. He was there being the last stop, really, on a series of signing statements that were very controversial, including on a bill that banned torture. He said that he was not involved in the legal advice that the administration had, the so-called Bybee memo, but we can't know that unless we see those documents. But as Karl Rove noted, everything that had to do with policy passed through his hands. It was very common to write cover memos to express your own views. And it's time, I think, that the Democrats demand to see those records, as Republicans demanded to see Elena Kagan's records when she served in the Clinton White House. That was appropriate then. I think it's appropriate now.
Yeah, and you mentioned at least three important issues there. I'll tick them off: torture, abortion, and gay marriage. Starting with torture and the Bybee memo and a lot of the legal chicanery that went on to try to support what was clearly ruled to be illegal interrogation and torture techniques. Is your view that he could have been a part of supporting that? And if he would support torture, then what else would he support under Trump?
Well, it is clear that Trump signed legislation that banned torture. That was bipartisan legislation, but said in his signing statement that if he believed that legislation was unconstitutional, he wouldn't follow it. And Mr. Kavanaugh had the last stop on that signing statement, what his views that he expressed to the president in terms of his constitutional authority were, I think, is fair game for the Senate. They ought to know the answer to that question.
Just to be clear, I just want to be clear on, you're saying that in that role, your concern is that he was the sort of the last legal line and that he cracked the door open to more potential torture in the way that he worked in the White House? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that unless you see those documents, you don't know the answer to that question. And
Got
so that's why it's so important to be able to access those documents. We do know, though, Ari, that he is a very strong proponent of strong executive power, and he's written and spoken extensively about both his experiences investigating a sitting president, that was President Clinton, and then subsequently his change of heart about that, and the notion that no sitting president should be forced to answer subpoenas. He's gone so far as to suggest that even the unanimous decision in U.S. v. Nixon was wrongly decided. And so we know that after pursuing the President Clinton during the Starr investigation, he had a change of heart once he went to work for President Bush and subsequently. I think those are issues also.
Is that the core? Let me ask you, is that the core then of where Democrats are going with this? Not that he is a traditional Republican appointee who may do things that shock many people. Most women in America would be against overturning Roe, as well as a lot of other people. But not so much only that, but you and the Democrats are basically saying this person was picked by Trump to protect Trump, that he is part of a softer type of obstruction. Are you prepared to go that far?
I think we have to, examine his record and look at the context. President Trump and Mr. Giuliani has said he's going to decide whether to force a subpoena for Mr. Mueller or whether he's going to voluntarily testify. That's a decision that could easily go to the Supreme Court. Mr. Kavanaugh has expressed his views already on that subject matter and saying that the president shouldn't be forced to answer subpoenas. And so, you never know what's in Donald Trump's mind, but you have to know that he knew that Kavanaugh was someone who wanted to protect the president in a context that he finds himself in. And think of the constitutional crisis we'd be in if he was the deciding vote in a constitutional crisis where Mr. Mueller actually issued a subpoena and the White House and Donald Trump refused to comply with it. I think it is a context for this nomination. I'm not casting aspersions on the integrity of Mr. Kavanaugh, but he has well-expressed views here, and there's a context in his appointment to this seat. And so I think Democrats really need to examine what he intends to do if faced with that choice.
Right, and I understand how precise and measured you're being while raising the fact that this is not a drill. We're dealing with a president who seems to delight in breaking things, and the question of whether Mueller can put him in the grand jury box if he won't do the interview, unlike the Clinton example where it was negotiated out, may go all the way to the Supreme Court. I mean, I think you're saying something that our viewers know is a very real possibility in the near term. Speaking of the Mueller probe, I want to get to that. I want to play for you Donald Trump, who did promise to come out with all of this dirt on your side. And as with all things in politics, rough and dirty is fine, illegal or foreign is not. Let's look at that moment, and then we'll ask you about it.
Okay.
I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
That was hours after Donald Trump Jr. confirmed the Trump Tower meeting. The president's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, now says Donald Trump knew about it. Can you shed any light on that based on what you experienced then being on the other side of it and what you've learned pursuant to the probe? Because witnesses and victims are free to talk in public. Do you think there is reason to credibly believe that Donald Trump was in on that from the beginning? And if so, is that an election conspiracy?
Well, Mr. Trump says he wasn't, but he has no credibility because he lies all the time. Mr. Cohen says he knew about this meeting. Clearly, the meeting was set up with the promise of delivering dirt from the Russians on Secretary Clinton. They encouraged it. They suggested the timing of it. Mr. Trump now says he didn't know about it. I think he has very limited credibility. The one thing we do know that as a result of the most recent Mueller indictments of the Russian actors who hacked the DNC, hacked my personal email account, hack other individuals in the Clinton campaign, was they got very active after Mr. Trump stood on the stage and said, please, after they were accused and really known to be hacking the DNC, Mr. Trump stood on the stage and said, please hack Secretary Clinton's emails. That people were aghast by that and suggested that was, in fact, treasonous at the time. But now we know that the Russians were listening to him, that they increased their activity that very night. And so,
when you were on that point, sir, when you were inside the campaign that night, the next day, did you view that as rhetoric, or did you think then, wow, he's asking for other people to commit crimes against us? What do we do about it?
I think it was the latter. I think that we kept trying to call out, and Secretary Clinton from very early in the process during the primaries suggested that Mr. Trump had definitely unusual views about the U.S.-Russian bilateral relationship and had adopted policies that were more in keeping with President Putin's view than the bipartisan view here. But as time went on, we kept calling attention to the press. I think the press covered it to some extent, but didn't take it very seriously. We now know this was a serious incursion filled with criminal activity against our democracy.
And on that, I'm over time, but you make
Mr.
one more.
Trump last night still call it a hoax.
Right. You make one more important point. I want to give you a brief piece on this because we don't want to exempt ourselves from the issues. The way that the press covered it then doesn't look good in the benefit of hindsight. Do you think that was largely because people didn't get the magnitude of what Russia was doing, or because there was a false sense that Trump was going to lose anyway and a kind of antipathy towards Clinton? And do you think that biased it?
I think, quite frankly, I think a little bit of both. I mean, it's a complicated story. It's a harder story to tell. But it was a story that, in my view, was as important as the Watergate burglary. This was an incursion. It was a criminal, as I said, criminal activities. I was the victim of one of those crimes. And the press sort of thought it was, an interesting political story, but didn't take it with the seriousness that certainly post-election and now that we know what we know from the intelligence community sources was, a much more serious attack on our democracy. And, look, that's spilt milk. I think that right now what's important is to get all the facts out, to protect the Mueller investigation, to make sure that, I don't know what he's going to do ultimately with Mr. Trump or some of his associates, but he's clearly gotten guilty pleas from his national security advisor, from his deputy campaign manager, from senior officials in his campaign. We know that they had more than 80 meetings with Russian sources, they had more than 80 contacts with Russian sources, more than 20 meetings with Russian actors. So I leave it up to Mr. Mueller, but I think that he's conducted this professionally, quietly, and we'll see where it lands.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.